Tell me when you're ready. Dennis, are you ready?
I'm not.
But you're not?
I changed my mind.
Okay. That's too bad.
There is not.
Yeah, well, we'll go without you. The three of us will make up the decisions. We've got a quorum. You want a hug? We're Yeah, well, I'm sure. Let's get this show going. Rebecca, your 10 seconds is going. All right. I'd like to reconvene our budget hearings, and we're going to do the pledge again. Supervisor Stopper, could you lead us, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Please begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Jack always stands like he's still in the Army. Old habits. Good. So really, we've approved almost all the departments' budgets as presented, and we have some outstanding items, and I would like staff to review them to make sure we're all on the same page of what we're going to be doing. Mr. Mills, could you please close the door? Thank you. All right. Krista or Al?
Madam Chair, I'll do an introduction if you don't mind, and then I'll hand it off to Deputy CAO Von Lotta. Hopefully. I don't see Zoom up yet. I'm assuming it's safe to go? Okay. Yeah, it was.
We're gonna take a 3 or 4 minute recess. Okay, and just want to recap. Yesterday, we approved almost all the budgets as presented by the CAO's office. There were a few items that are on the table left for discussion, and I'd like the CAO or the deputy to please proceed. Mr. Alt.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, and members of the public that are with us this morning. Just to recap what happened after we closed yesterday's meeting, the sheriff, the undersheriff, and their financial tech met with Deputy Von Lotta and I, and we arm wrestled over what the sheriff wanted, and as you can see, he's a fit gentleman, and he won the arm wrestling, so we have included all of his requests on the tally that you can see before you.
No.
We have included them to give a rough order of magnitude of what the board's, what things came before the board for consideration, and now is the opportunity for us to talk about what the board prioritizes as items that they will fund in the recommended budget. And we'll talk real quickly about items that, where might these be funded from. So as the board well knows, and not to preach to the board, but to help the public understand, we've put forward a budget and the CAO recommended with conservative revenue estimates, and we acknowledge that they are very conservative. There are areas in the revenues where we programmed in significant reductions, planning for the potential of COVID affecting our budget going into the coming year. We've also had discussions about revenues in OES and FEMA reimbursements and how we've planned on those reimbursements and how we think the dollars tie out with what we will get in our revenue. What's not included in the FEMA revenue and the potential of reimbursement is any reimbursement from the COVID disaster, because it's ongoing. For one, and we don't know when that will end, and secondarily to that, even once it does end, there's two risks. One is the timeliness with which FEMA or Cal OES may reimburse us for any of our requests, and there's always the potential of, particularly in this particular disaster, that the request statewide will far outrun the amount of funding that's available. So we haven't programmed any of that revenue in the current year recommended budget because there's so many unknowns with it. So that leaves us with having to look at other potential revenue areas or areas that we would look at expenditure reductions if there's items to be considered that are on the running total that have been provided to the board, or as we talked about yesterday, if there might be reductions to contingency or reserve. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Deputy Von Lotta to be able to display for the board and the public. Although you have a hard copy, she'll be able to share her screen and show you the items and discuss the items that are on the tally that's before the board at this moment. Krista?
We can't hear you.
It looks like they're all talking to each other, but
You guys can't hear this, right?
No.
right.
Well, she is, but, they're on already. They're already on. We need a 5-minute break.
Got it? We'll do that. Thank you.
Sarah and Chris is going to keep talking during this time. Gotta love technology when it works.
I'd like to reconvene again. I would like the CAO to please go over, again, repeat, so we can start what is on our list of things to consider, and then, of course, what the options might be. Al?
Madam Chair, thank you. I wanted to touch on a few things. As I mentioned, as we did initiate the meeting in the first place, that there is a document that I referred to as a tally of the things that were under consideration at the end of the meeting yesterday. Deputy CAO Von Lotta will show that on the screen, and we'll go through that. But I wanted to provide some context because everything that's on this list is not what we heard in its entirety from the Sheriff's Department. But it's important to talk through a couple of the items because, as we talked about yesterday, they're all priority items for the Sheriff's Department. But in our meeting yesterday, we worked through some alternative methods to be able to address some of these things. You heard yesterday in the discussion about house cleaning items and personnel costs were shift differential and some other items in personnel costs that weren't carried over into the current year budget. In our discussions we talked about with the Sheriff's Department, we talked about salary savings, covering those at least initially, but at mid-year we may have to look, because of their current staffing levels being relatively high, we'll need to look at mid-year whether or not their salary savings will cover the personnel costs that weren't included in this year's recommended budget. But we've agreed to make sure that we track that and we come back and recognize it for the board. But in the meantime, we'll use the salary savings alternative method to cover it going forward.
Just trying to remember, that was $112,000, is that what it was?
It was a little over that. There were two separate
there were two
personnel
separate.
items that were a little over 200,000, correct? There were also, you heard about the SCBAs, obviously an important item and safety item for those who work in the jail. We will look at those at final if there's an opportunity. As you are aware, the ideal is that they have 8 SCBAs in operation in the jail. In the current year, the year that we're in, 4 were purchased. They need 4 more to be at the appropriate level, but have agreed to put that off until final. And if there's an opportunity, we'd like to be able to consider that at final. And then an item of particular importance to the board was the body cameras, and I'll describe those as, I learned a lot about those yesterday. Those are upfitting relative to the vehicles. They're not just what we've seen on TV, a body camera on an officer, but they're connected to all of the cameras in the car, really go with the car. So the body cameras and the upfitting for the vehicles, as you'll see on the front running tally, there's an adjustment in for $74,000 and there's an adjustment out for $74,000. We were able to look at some other contract items in the recommended budget, and the Sheriff's Office agreed to make an adjustment in their existing budget to be able to cover those costs. So we wanted to show it here as initially an expense because it was clear to us in the dialogue yesterday with the board that this is a very important item, but it's been taken care of in the recommended budget. So the net of what you see here is after our discussions, and I wanted to provide that context so that you understand that we haven't left anything off. We went through line by line, and there's some things that we'll have to take up at final, some things that we may have to take up at mid-year, and there are some things that the Sheriff's Office has agreed in the recommended budget to absorb some of those really important priorities that the board addressed yesterday. So the remainder is what's under consideration, and as I talked through earlier, now we just need to look at where and how we may accommodate those if the board's of the mind to look at the remainder of the requested draw. And if there's not any questions for me, I'll go ahead. First, if there's questions, I'll happily answer those. If not, I'll turn it to Krista Von Lotta and have her explain the list.
Go ahead, Ben. Do you have any? No? Dennis? No. Okay. Yeah, Krista,
Yes.
could you please proceed?
Oh,
Take us.
so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can see exactly what CAO Alt was just describing. Fingers crossed it works this time.
No.
Yeah, we can,
Oh, sorry. Did you have the Excel spreadsheet in front of you just then?
yes.
Okay. One more time. Okay. All right. So the first line is what we spoke about with respect to the assessor's office. This is the reclass request for the appraiser analyst.
This is
to
what
be
we have right here. Okay, Krista, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. So $17,482 as the board discussed yesterday, and that would be a salary add to allow that position, and then Human Resources would bring back an item with the amendment to the position control list. Also for discussion is the archives budget unit, so otherwise known as the museum. This is where we had made the 5% reduction at $1,974, but due to the fact that there is essentially no services and supplies budget, that would, by definition, need to be a staff cost cut. So we have included it here per board direction yesterday. Further to the sheriff's presentation yesterday afternoon and our meeting last night, we understand that there were 4 vehicles from this current fiscal year that for a host of reasons were not able to be fully procured, and for that the request to rebudget at $545,000 the fully outfitted 4 vehicles from this current fiscal year into next. Likewise, and this is difficult in terms of budget, but as was discussed yesterday, generally speaking, the recommendation is to obtain 4 fully outfitted police responder vehicles for the Sheriff's Department each year, as has been discussed. This is a way of avoiding large amounts of purchases in future years by kicking the can down the road, so to speak. That said, all of these requests, and when we get to the requested draw, total a pretty hefty sum. We were very fortunate to be able to work with the Sheriff's Department and actually rebudget some of their previously recommended professional and specialized services monies to cover the cost of the camera project that CAOL described for you. And for dispatch, there is a proposal to include, I'll need to change this actually to 5701 in both of these, but in any event, to include an ad tech dispatch remote radio interface upgrade for the dispatch center. And also for cannabis enforcement, this being the sheriff's unit, obviously rapid ID hardware and software at $26,700. So those are the proposals that we discussed, and we can see a little bit better here. We'll talk next about the contingencies draw request for the HVAC, but after that draw were the board to approve it, we would have $1.3 million approximately, which would be just under our 2% policy level threshold, but clearly within the purview of the board to reduce that. There is no requirement for us to have contingency technically. The requested draw were the board to authorize draw from contingencies or from any other funding source for all of these items is $975,000 approximately. If were we to take that from contingency, that would leave us with $332,000 going into this next fiscal year. Well, that's not advisable in terms of this really being a number that we would bridge the gap between here and September. It's not as inadvisable as it would be during, for example, the final budget hearings. So with that, does the board have any questions for me or CAO alter the sheriff's department.
I think we just want to cogitate a moment on this. Krista, do you anticipate these are the only options that we would have?
We can draw down from general fund reserves. Clearly the board could decide not to authorize all of these items, and we could discuss them one at a time. We could look to other departments and see if we could make reductions there and rearrange some general funds. Although I think based on yesterday's hearing, that's easier said than done at this point. And those are more or less our primary options. If anyone has any other suggestions, I'm certainly willing to entertain them.
Since the sheriff's office is the largest component of this, and most of it's going towards like capital assets, is there any way to move funding from some of the other units into capital assets?
So one option would be to essentially leave their appropriations the same, but authorize the CAO's office and the Auditor Controller's office to move the funds off of the services and supplies or others, other classes inside the same budget unit, leave the appropriations the same, but authorize them to use those appropriations for the procurement of capital. That's not, however, what they're requesting, just to be clear. But that is also an option.
So we're talking about reserves, contingency. I gather Teeter's been used already.
Correct. That's correct.
And to take money from other departments to fill these requests.
Correct.
Madam Chair, if I may, I tried to, and probably ineffectively so, contextualize a little bit at the beginning about how we've planned for the revenues, the ending fund balance, and our expenditures are all projections. We think they're prudent projections. That's why we've put them forward in the recommended budget. But I think it's a relatively simple matter of saying we take the recommended budget, we look at reserves or contingencies. But I don't want to oversimplify it. There's still discussion that can be had on, what level of confidence we have on some of the things like our revenue streams. There are revenue streams that we know are not programmed in with FEMA reimbursements, care funding, et cetera. But we don't know how to really quantify those. So it'd be a struggle for us to, even in this dialogue, to figure out how we would program in additional revenues. That said, it is an option that would be available to us. The Teeter Fund is, we believe, would be entirely exhausted, but that's a projection as well. I'm not suggesting that we project it higher so that we can have a larger draw, but I wouldn't be 100% transparent if I weren't talking about that being an option. The ending fund balance is always a projection, and we know typically we're low on that, but we're low for good reason. We don't want to project that as a revenue stream and have the board as a one-time revenue that goes into the budget. We don't want to project that high and then have to come back at final or mid-year and have to make a very significant course correction later in the year. So, we hope it to be as accurate as possible, but we know from years past that it's typically low. So those are all options that are on the table. I'm not recommending any of them at this point in time because they would be our best guess in this room based on the lack of information that we have when we prepared the budget. But in full transparency, there are things that could be under discussion, and I wanted to make sure that they're out there and I know the board's well aware of this, but contingency and reserve are not the only options. They're just the hardest numbers we can look at right now. And if we were to look at those, my first recommendation would be if we get to final and there's higher ending fund balance, or we see more revenues come in, or we have more information about CARES funding, for example, that the board put a first priority on that to backfill reserves and contingencies, if that's the route the board chooses to take, back to at least the policy minimums. So while there might be a call on that money now, that we don't come back in at final and not pay ourselves first in our savings accounts. We pay that first, we backfill that, and then consider any other options at final if we were to pull from those two funds.
Okay, thank you. Jack?
Madam Chair, thank you, Al. Maybe one of the things we can do is, I think that, we're being very conservative. I think that's wise at this point, is come up with that final number on what we actually want to spend. And we could talk about how we get the revenue side on it, but I think we also ought to have a policy discussion about taking our chill to a colder temperature. And, unless it's mandated, I don't think we ought to take on more bodies. That will help on some of the salary savings going forward. But that would be sort of a policy direction from this board to sort of to back the CAO on that. I don't have a problem going below on contingencies as long as they're first in line to get refilled when we actually get real numbers in August. We're guessing so hard on these things.
Might I comment on that possible solution? So that's one of the expenditures that we could look at as the chill. In the budget documentation, the department heads are well aware that we have a criteria around, and I get that a criteria is not a hard, fast guide, but we've essentially said that we would chill positions that are, or that we would hire positions outside of the chill if they are no net effect to the general fund, if they're revenue generating, or if they're a mandate, or if they're going to be a cost driver anyways, even absent the chill. And so because the sheriff's office is here, I'll use their example in the jail. Although we know we're getting close to being very, very close to full staff because we've been very actively recruiting, at the end of the day, we know that if we don't fill those positions and we put those on a hiring freeze, we're going to pay for the appropriate jail staffing in overtime. So where we know there's going to be an offset cost, we've been putting those forward. But outside of that, there are, off the top of my head, 70 or so positions that are unfilled right now that many of them don't meet that criteria, and they've been kind of on a case-by-case basis. And so if we had that kind of policy direction, I would suggest that with moving forward with the budget, we could take the initial reduction in contingencies and reserve. We could do the work that's directed on the open positions, bring back to the board our recommendation on the positions that would be on a freeze until final, and show that revenue essentially to backfill whatever you draw down on contingencies and reserves today to authorize the expenditures that you want. But we can do those things, kind of in tandem. We know that there's a lot of open positions, and we know there's a lot of money locked up in salary savings, but we've been trying to be as respectful as we can to department heads to have them at least have opportunity to have chilled positions considered, because we want them to be able to run their own departments. But through the dialogue now, we're hearing that we need some more solutions, and that's one that we could consider.
So if positions are already in queue, for example, like the district attorney talked about her two yesterday, or others where offers are out, or we're recruiting, those are still in. It's anything outside of that. Is that what I hear you saying?
What we've done through the course of this spring, and we carried forward in the recommended budget, is that anything that had been approved and the start of the process, we didn't chill those. Okay. Particularly the ones that have gotten through background. Anything or to the background stage, anything that comes open or hadn't gotten to that point, we've essentially chilled those and pumped the brakes on those. So there's several positions that are remaining open that we have applied the chill to. But what I would recommend, as we heard yesterday, we have positions that are in background and we have offers out And we don't end up becoming an employer of choice if we pull back those offers when we get to that point. So, we're trying to do a balancing act between being a responsible employer on how we don't bring people in that are going to be subject to layoff, but also not get them to the point where maybe their employer already knows that they're considering leaving, and we've, potentially subjected them to some harm in their existing employment.
Is that acceptable? Jack?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just want to make sure that the department heads know that if they make these hires, there's no guarantees. So that's, we have our responsibility, but they're not without responsibility too. If they're going to make a hire and we have an uncertain budget and we end up having to cut positions, they got some ownership in that.
If the board's of the mind to consider something beyond a chill, and I don't know what is between a chill and a freeze, but
Really cold.
right, I would suggest that we can have an ongoing dialogue with the board where we bring positions here and we give a report out on, and we can take a list of the open positions. We can show you the ones that have been chilled, and give an opportunity for department heads if they want first to make and they do this already to our office, they make a rationalization, they put it in writing, and essentially a business case for why they need to put the position forward. And if I uphold the chill, they can always come here. We can show the list in an information item regularly to the board until we get the final. And certainly the board's prerogative, and you typically don't operate or involve yourself in that type of operational level, but if we're going to consider what's between a chill and a freeze, I don't see any issue why we couldn't come here and at least provide an opportunity for me upholding the policy direction of the board, but a department head being able to come here and provide the rationalization, and maybe we consider putting a position in place on a position-by-position basis.
I'm not sure, at least for me, I want to micromanage that. I have to trust that you do that. I think your department's put through a very prudent budget. What I hear Jack saying is, given what we know now and going forward, that the departments are cognizant of, if they want to cut other things, as I think I heard Jack tell the district attorney yesterday, this is your budget, you cut where you want, that come final budget, things could be different, and they have to take ownership, not just the board. I don't know, are any of you wanting to have positions come before us or micromanage to that level? Gary, Ben, Dennis, Jack?
That seems, that should be run by departments and CAO, right. But as long as they get clear direction that they got a really high threshold to get anything through.
Right. Okay.
I don't know, what's everybody else think?
We got a couple lights on.
Dennis?
Yeah, I think knowing where we are right now, there's way too many funding unknowns. I said at the very beginning of this hearing, gave you a breakdown of the position control list, and that there were 25 positions that were never filled last year or the year before. They in essence became parking lot positions. That's easily $2 million probably that could come back into the system if we just said, okay, we're not going to deal with them right now. We'll pull those positions back. And if you're looking at positions that are revenue generating, public safety, or that you have a policy direction that you're giving to the staff regarding the other 87 positions, or the 87 total positions that are open, there's probably a good number of those that in the short term, we could just say, look, we're going to pull those positions out. We'll come back on a case-by-case basis and give you some kind of breathing room with having those funds then back in the general fund or whatever fund they belong to. So I would like to take a look at those 87 current open positions. I know you may have job offers out. You may have, some of them are in process now. I understand that. But at the same time, if we could even find $2 to $3 million sitting there in that particular section and just pull it out until August and say, until we know better where we're at, then we can decide from there what we're going to do. We're going to put those positions back in, start looking for people, whatever it might be. But for right now, we don't have the breathing room, and that's part of the problem. I would also like to ask the sheriff or his analyst, what is your current AB 443 fund balance? Sorry, I didn't warn you. I was going to ask that question.
While Oscar looks up the exact number, it is significantly lower than we're comfortable with. As you recall, we've expended an incredible amount of money, including the entirety of the armored vehicle the last few years, the drones. We've bought a lot of technology and upgrades, but Oscar will get you the number. I know we're significantly lower than our neighbors, that's for sure.
I remember what it was when we started the conversation.
It was zeroed out at one point. We were
Yeah.
we were digging out after the recession, and then we've been spending out of it a lot the last couple of years.
My question
289,000.
How much?
My guess is 289,000.
is your balance?
It says that book has an expected fund balance at the end of 2021 is 1.2.
Yeah, that's on page 46.
Yeah, but that's projection.
Are
But
we discussing the sheriff's budget again, or?
No, I'm just trying to find funding options here. And one of the things that
Well, that's what I threw out, find it from other departments and take it off the list.
well, the point is that if there is any funds available, is there a possibility we could borrow from 443 temporarily? Anything that we might be able to backfill it later in August?
I just want to caution the board that there was monies paid as salaries, because that's what we're talking about, I'm assuming, out of 443 for many, many years, and I finally got that reversed, which has allowed us to purchase this equipment that we've been buying as opposed to coming to the general fund. So I would caution the board as to utilizing 443 money for that. That money was sent to the sheriff's offices to keep up with technology, to buy those extra cars that we need and those drones that we bought and the Bearcat and those types of items. I'd hate to see us get into the habit of trying to use it for personnel. I think that would be a mistake again.
So just to clarify, there's approximately $1.2 million projected to be at the fund balance at the end of next fiscal year in this current budget. That's in one of the main accounts. They're actually marked.
But then that doesn't account for anticipated expenditures. It's 900.
It actually does.
I'm just looking at it as a potential option in the short term. Not to say that we're going to make it a habit or that we're going to be going down that road every year, but we're trying to find some cash here and some stability. And that might be one way in the short term to help us get through it and still meet the obligations that we're being asked to do here.
Gary?
Well, to Dennis's point of the 25 that have been in a parking lot situation, I don't know how many of those are general fund, because any of these 25 or 87 aren't all general fund, I'm sure. We can only deal with the general fund portion of these. Certainly we can put a freeze on, but it's certainly not going to help the general fund portion of money we're looking for. The other caveat to this thing is we have an ag commissioner position interim and the not integrated waste, but environmental health interim that we can't freeze. We have to go forward with those, and whether obviously the ag commissioner isn't going to stay, but Lisa could very well be that permanent person, but then we need to replace her. So those are the types of positions that we can't freeze. We have to keep open and keep going forward. So when we look at these positions that are open, we have to keep those in mind. So whether the 25, I'm not sure all of those are general fund or the 2 million.
I'm looking right now.
Ben?
The AB 443 money, I mean, Mr. DeBasilio does bring up a good point. That's the backfill, technical services and vehicles and everything. So we were talking more towards the ends of staff and that, but we do have before us some patrol vehicles. In the juggle of things, maybe on the caveat that as soon as we got in more revenue at the first opportunity that we could backfill in that AB 443 money in the future, just to get us through this portion until that time. I mean, I'm a little bit more optimistic that we are going very conservative at this time. It is my belief, after listening to the assessor yesterday about the rolls that did close, that we will have closer to a 5% raise in assessed taxes as opposed to the 3% that she conservatively projected. That she made an extravagant step, bringing it down another 2,000 on the close. And then there's other caveats that I could speak about for quite a while, but I'm optimistic that we have projected conservatively, which we have asked for, and that the revenue will be more in the future. And if so, as one thing, possibly part of the discussion is if the sheriff's willing to work with us with those AB 443 monies to backfill some of these patrol positions, as opposed to working that towards salaries, with the caveat that in the future, as soon as those revenues come in, we will immediately pay that back to that AB 443 for the sheriff to use as he wills in the future. Just a suggestion.
By the way, the number's 8 general fund positions.
8.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is 3 times a week, Dennis. I'm going to agree with you on this. We're going to start keeping score here. But it is difficult to contemplate cutting other things when there's a $1.2 million balance. That's specifically for equipment and upgrades, technology. So I would contemplate a loan, a payment, or this might just be a good sheriff contribution.
Rick, did you want to tell us why you think this is a bad idea?
Well, I think this is a bad idea, going after 443 money, because in the past, when we've come to budget cuts to where we've had to lay off people, that's what was able to save people. I think that if you're going to go after 443 money, use some contingency or use some reserves money and do what you're saying you're going to do with 443 money. Put that money back in when the things come out right.
So you'd be agreeable to using
No, ma'am.
443?
No, ma'am. I'm suggesting, as opposed to using 443, use contingencies or reserve funding,
Got it.
just like you want to do with 443.
Got
I
it.
mean,
Okay.
I really don't want to spend that 443 money, because if for some reason down the road we do have some issues and we come into layoffs, that money can save some deputies. And I would rather it be there to save a deputy at that time if that's what had to absolutely happen.
But if it's for equipment,
But that's what it's designed for, is equipment, I understand, but I'm back to the same scenario. If you're going to borrow from 443, why not borrow from the county's contingencies or the reserves and then pay that money back just like you would have for 443? Because if things go south, now that money is gone and I cannot save deputies.
so what I hear Dennis saying is use the 443 for the 332,000 for the 4 vehicles, right? Dennis?
And that would be
And then when
a
at final
loan.
budget, we would, because we're really thinking more positive because we've been so, to repay 443.
Okay, and I'm back to,
No.
if you're going to
No.
borrow from 443, unless you want to give me 10% interest.
Not,
I am concerned about that.
I'll give you Jack's cowboy hat.
Well, then I'll go back to, if I'm concerned about your credit worthiness, why would you not take it out of contingencies or reserves and pay yourselves back?
I think, Sheriff, one thing is we don't have the contingencies to play with at all. in terms of what the state's mandate is for contingencies. And that's the last thing we want to hear is that word layoff. We're not wanting to run down that road.
I understand
So we're
that.
doing everything we can to be sure that we keep the stable workforce that we have right now and appreciate what they're trying to do to help us in this time as well.
Right.
So all of this really comes down to the key issue, sir, of cash flow. That's really what it comes down to, and I said that before, and I'll keep saying it. We do not want to be in the same thing as we did with Butte Fire and tree mortality, where we're trying to worry about paying warrants. And I know that by August, we'll have a real clear understanding where we are, and our final budget will reflect that. But we have to be overly conservative at this point because of the number of unknowns that are sitting out there that could slap us very hard.
Right. I understand that. Let me talk to the undersheriff here real quick.
Rick,
Yes,
I
sir.
want to point out that I did not bring up 443 funds.
I know.
4 other supervisors are talking about splitting it up.
This time, 3 of them. 4 of them, actually.
4 of them, actually.
Yeah.
So we'll take a 5-minute recess?
Okay.
Wait.
Couple more questions of Mr. Alt real quick. Go ahead, Mr. Garamendi, I'll follow you up.
Go ahead, Ben.
Look, we're looking at contingencies. You put together some solid numbers here. This would put us significantly below the 2%. Reserves, is that percentage supposed to be at 8%?
The policy is 8 or above.
8%, that's by law.
8%. One thing I do want to bring up with that, we just had this conversation, the sheriff likes to keep a certain amount of AB 443, just in case something goes wrong, and then he has to backfill so he can pay his positions. Well, that's what our contingencies and reserves are for at the same time. But we do have an option to dip into the reserves also with a certain type of vote, from what I understand, that during emergency situations. Is that correct, Mr. Earl?
Yeah, I don't want to oversimplify it, but so our public can understand. In general, we have to have an emergency. Certainly, council can weigh in on this, but we do have 2 declared emergencies, both the public health emergency and the OES emergency. I think that would qualify. And then my understanding is that for us to drop below the 8%, that the board there has to be a 4/5 vote to do so.
For the reserves.
For the reserves.
What about for contingencies?
My understanding is on the contingencies, we can drop through below the 2% on a majority vote of the board with the budget.
That's correct.
Krista, could you clarify what we would need for each?
Right, so for drawing contingencies any time of year outside of the budget process, so recommended budget in June and September budget for adoption, it would be a 4/5 vote. However, during the budget process, at those times, it's a 3/5 vote. CAO Alt is correct, and as much as it is possible to reduce the general fund reserve outside of the adopted budget in September with a 4/5 vote and a qualifying declared emergency, I would need to refer back to the statute and bring that back to you, which I could do quickly if you wanted more specifics on that. But the only other opportunity that the board has to adjust the contingency and rather the general fund reserve is for adopted budget in September, at which point it can be increased or decreased with a 3/5 vote of the board. Any other time of year, it would require a qualifying declared emergency and a 4/5 vote.
I'd like to bring up one point, and I got to go back to our previous auditor, and it was before I came to this board. I was sitting in the audience, and all she said was, all it's going to take is another fire. If we don't preserve our contingencies and our general fund reserve right now, by the time we get to August, we may be in that position again with cash flow because we haven't done it. So let's not run down that road, please.
So where would you recommend?
Well, I
that
got
we
another
take?
option, and I spent some time with John Osborne last night, talking about his OES situation, just exactly what kind of closings does he have with those various projects that are out there? And is the numbers that he's coming up with, maybe John can speak to that, come to the board to speak to that. It might be more than just the $2 million that he has shown us. I think he's been very conservative in his assessment of the situation as well. However, when you talk about submitting to OES and FEMA, there's an entire time trail that takes place that is, if he was to submit now, it probably would be August or September before he'd get any confirmation of a funding coming back. But that might be another option for us to look at. How much that is, I don't know. I would guess about another $1 million, just roughly looking at his board.
But that's not money that we have now.
That's money that
to
will be
come.
coming. We've already, to some degree, paid on some of that or have received some of those funds, but this is additional over and above. And remember that the COVID is, he's got to work up a board on COVID right now, and how quickly the state will come back and reimburse on those COVID expenses is another one that we don't know. We've paid out money on COVID, but we haven't been reimbursed, and it isn't like the Butte Fire where they gave us, an immediate 25% cash advance. So we've been paying out on that, and that's just been going against these departments' budgets.
So what I hear you
So-
saying is you want us to up then the
revenue.
income based on what you think we're going to get.
Not what I think. I think what John would, and what the
Okay, even
CAO would give us
let's
as
say
the
what John
best.
says.
Yeah.
Let's say it's $1 million. So even though it's not in the bank, you want us to up the revenue based on the come.
I would like to have the board hear from John, and for all of us to have a good understanding of just exactly what he's got in the pipeline right now that may come in between now and, say, December. Not so much what's going to happen in January, February, now in December. And realize what kind of a buffer that is as well.
Ben?
I'm hearing what Supervisor Mills has to say. It's whether there's a fire, whether there's another outbreak of COVID, or what it be, another set of PSPS events going into this thing. It seems like throughout the state, everyone's doing the same thing. We put out one fire and another one starts right back up. We're in a series of emergencies, and we do need to be mindful of that and how we proceed for the future. I do think that he's got a very good point, because revenue is not just what we have in the bank as of July 1st. It's projected revenue, because we know it's coming in, or we have good data that it will come in within this next fiscal year. So I definitely would support him in listening to what Mr. Osborne has to say on that, because I think that could potentially put some more revenue on the books if we're comfortable with what he has to say, that we could work with and move forward, and maybe keep the sheriff happy so that he has all his AB 443 money, and then we don't have to worry about it when he needs another Bear Scout.
Gary?
I'm sorry.
If we're going down that road, then if I remember midterm and where we were on our projections for income, we were below what we had projected. Is there any way that we can find out at the end of March where we were on our income for this current year in our projections? It may give us a little bit of insight as to over the last 3 months here, because June, we're not completely recovered. We're not completely out of this thing. We're only going into stage 3 this Friday. This quarter is almost over, so this year, within the next couple of weeks, is going to be over. But at least we had a projection of what we were in March. We know we've lost in these last 3 months. Where are we going to be at the end of this budget when we're saying we're going to close the books with the X amount of dollars? We don't know that. That's another projection as what we assume we've lost. But if we could at least see where we're at the end of March in the current budget, it may give us a little bit of insight going into the next year's budget.
So I'll answer some of those things generally, and obviously Krista's on the line, and I believe the auditor controller as well. So to the point of where we stand in the current year, they work through the projections, the actuals at the point that they were preparing the projections. So the ending fund balance of $3 million includes what we would anticipate getting in revenue through the remainder of the year. Really, and this is me, they certainly can provide color commentary. The revenue's a little less difficult to project than what our expenditures are going to be in the outstanding budget. So usually what we see is the expenditures, well, it's a combination of both, right? But at the end of the day, there's unaccounted for expenditures that we thought were going to be expended during the budget year that ended up contributing to the ending fund balance. So in essence, the current projected ending fund balance takes into account what you're asking. It is a projection, and there is room to move it around. I can't speak to what point at which they did it, but I think it was through the 3/4 of the year.
It was through the end of March on these projections that are in this budget?
I believe so. Krista and I think Kathy's here as well electronically. Is that correct?
Hi, I'm here. Sorry, I had to drop off and log back in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I did miss the last 45 seconds or so of the conversation, but we did work with the auditor controller, and I'm happy for her to join in as part of this conversation, and would you like to do so, but to come up with the fund balance projections. Actually, I'm receiving a communication from her now, but as she notes, it's hard to look at March in terms of being able to project out over the last quarter of the year because so much happens in April. We received the first 50% of the property, I believe, property tax for December, and the 45% of the remainder comes in April. So in addition, we receive things like TOT for Q1 is due by April 30. So it's not necessarily as informative as some of the other dates. We did, however, both concur that revenues are likely to end strong for this current fiscal year, despite COVID, even after ratcheting down to some extent our projections. We're not intending to see or expecting to see the overages that we had hoped for, but we're not going to see less than what's currently budgeted. And that was all incorporated in our fund balance projection. Did that answer the question, or is there another that I could respond to clarify?
No, that does, as long as the projections in here I was trying to get to the close of March. We're in June now, and you guys are putting this budget together starting back in February. So I'm not sure if all of these tallies were at the close of March and what your projections were. That was one of the questions that I had. I from what I'm hearing you used the best that you could at the time you're putting this together. Going
yes,
after the end of March, you came back and readjusted them. So it doesn't project what the closing quarter of this is on this current budget. However, historically, I got to say, and Marita knows, going back to we had the recession when the state had a $54.8 billion gap in their budget. They're gonna balance their budget first. So they reduced property taxes coming into this county, and they withheld money. They didn't give the money out on the projected dates that they were supposed to. So we had a lot of issues, especially going into the third and fourth year, of cash flow. So we need to be cognizant of that when our contingencies are dipping down as far as they are, and our reserve is going down as far as it is, that there's going to, and we have no teeter. At that time, we were using, if you remember, we were using all of teeter just as cash flow. And we ended up paying it back when we eventually got paid back by the state. But at this point, with teeter being used in this budget, there could be going forward, depending on what the state does to balance their budget. And that projection of 54.8 was about a month ago. It could be even higher by the time they close this year in the next couple of weeks, what that actual deficit is going to be in coming budget, because they haven't agreed on that budget yet. But they're going to balance first. They always do. They're going to balance their budget, and then we have to deal with what they do. Just a little bit of insight from history going back. So we are going to need some cash flow. We can't empty all of these funds, and then we're in a problem where we can't pay our bills because we have no cash flow, and we're expecting money coming in, but we haven't got it.
So what would you recommend? That
On
we
this,
get,
in my opinion, right now, the only issue on all of these is until we get to final budget and we know what the state has done and what's going to happen, the only issue is the $545,000 that was spent and not carried over. Everything else on all of this can hold off, in my opinion, until we get to final budget. I mean, that's the only thing we can do, because we'll be spending money that we may not have. And then we'll be reeling stuff in. Like Jack said, we may be laying people off. We may be doing something at midterm just to get our budget in the place that we need it to be, and we could be putting Kathy in a position that she can't pay the bills because there's no cash flow. So that's my opinion.
Ben?
I agree with Supervisor Toffenelli. The only thing on here that we shouldn't need to hold off until we have our actuals and we're going into the final budget is the $545,000 at this time. The other ones we can come back to at a later time. And you know, Supervisor, again, I will repeat, Supervisor Mills has a very strong point when it comes to reducing our contingencies and our reserve going into not knowing. And I'll also follow up with something else that Mr. Toffenelli did say, is when the state held into money during the recession from our tax base, they already cut the school districts by 10%. They're already holding back 10% of their money due. So they're already in the process of doing such. And we need to be cognizant of that, as Supervisor Toffenelli has said. So that puts me in a position with those two gentlemen's points that I agree 100%. Everything else should be back to our final budget in August and September. And then the only thing we need to talk about is the $545,000 that's already spent that didn't get rolled over into this year for right now.
So you had wanted to agree with Dennis on upping the income. Are you changing that?
No, I still think we should have that discussion. We haven't had that discussion yet. I think that that's something that we need to have before we make our final decision today. But right now, with this discussion and these two gentlemen's very strong points, without any other revenue coming in at this time that we can put down hard, that's the position I'm in at this time.
Madam Chair, if I might.
Yeah.
I just want to bring to light what Mr. Toffenelli said. We don't know what the state's going to do. And you, Supervisor Callaway and Mr. Toffenelli, were here during the recession when we did not receive any 443 monies. So for me to draw down on that makes me very nervous, because again, what you just said, we don't know what the state's going to do. I don't see a problem in so much as putting off, talking about the 545 right now so that we can get what was budgeted last year done now. I just would like to caution you and bring back to light that if you push off the other vehicles until August, when you go to final budget, there's going to be a backlag again of being able to purchase the vehicles, and now we're going to be back to where we are right now. So I just want to bring that to your attention, and I also want to bring up the 443 again, why I'm so diligent in hanging on to that funding, because we don't know if or when we're going to get more funding. So just food for thought.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I had a conversation with CAO yesterday on the condition that this 545 and maybe other departments, I think going into the year coming forward, we're going to deal with a policy on that type of situation, to where that money, when we go forward with the budget, that money is there. So we don't run into this continuing problem that you have.
So we
I
encumber
think
it for the following year.
Correct. Whatever we
already-
come up with that we can do, but this is a continuing problem, and it may not just affect your department, it's other departments it affect too, that run into the same situation. So I think we're going to deal with that later on in the year, Rick.
So if I might address the revenue question about OES, and I'll say broadly, I'll paint all of our revenues with the same broad stroke. We've been very conservative in our revenues, and I think it's important to say that because there is a lot of unknowns, but I want to contextualize that for our employees that are watching, that we took such a conservative approach on the ending fund balance and all of the revenues, so that in our best hopes, we're putting the board and us as an organization in a position where we're not talking about layoffs in the current year. Really, the approach that we've taken with the budget is to preserve everything, make moderate cuts to preserve everything that we can and get through this year and hope that the conditions improve. I can tell you honestly, if we were doing multi-year budgeting, that would really scare me for next year. Our conservative approach in preserving everything we can this year might cause us to have to take stronger and more quickly have to act for next year. I am concerned about that, but for the board's sake and our employees' sake, our budget is put forward to preserve everything that we can in the current year. That applies to OES in that the criteria that was put forward, it isn't John's. I don't want to hold John responsible for having been so conservative. I've essentially set the criteria that if we've completed a project and we've submitted the paperwork, we'll include the revenue. That doesn't mean that we're going to get it in the current year. We still might get it in the next fiscal year, but I'm working on the assumption that if we're able to submit the paperwork, it's fair and reasonable for us to expect it in the current year, and everything that happens after that is beyond our control. What's not included in the revenue is any project that's planned to complete in the current fiscal or the coming fiscal year that we haven't submitted any documents to. So if we were to change our criteria and include projects that are planned to complete and that will submit the paperwork in the current year, the revenue would be higher. What I can tell you with some level of certainty is even if we complete the project in the first quarter of the year and then submit the paperwork, we're likely not going to get the revenue in the current year. And so and then we've gone back to kind of an in-between of what we're doing now and what we had in the previous fiscal year that caused us to pull all that revenue out. It's not as dicey as the approaches that we were taking because you've seen the project schedules between Josh and John and the help with the auditor's office. We've got that pretty dialed in now, and we're completing the projects, we're monitoring them, we're submitting the paperwork pretty expeditiously, but I don't feel comfortable. I didn't in the recommended budget in saying every project that will complete in the next fiscal year that will actually have the corresponding revenue. However, that is an approach that is a viable approach. It's not as conservative as the approach that I've started with, but it does bring some validity that if we complete the project, we can reasonably assume we're going to submit the paperwork and we could track the revenue. At least then we know the documentation is in. For the roughly $9 million that we took out in the last fiscal year, we couldn't even evidence that the projects had been completed, whether we'd been authorized for the money, whether we'd submitted paperwork. So there was far more unknowns than what we're experiencing now, and I think that's really what Supervisor Mills is speaking to now, is that we have the project schedules, we know some are going to complete, and so I'm certainly flexible. I did that, I feel, at the board's direction to be conservative. But there's also a next level that we could step into that not as conservative. It's got a little bit more risk to it, but at least you already are monitoring that the projects are being completed and we're verifying that we're submitting the paperwork. So for what that's worth, that's really not on John. That was my call, but John does have all the data on what would complete and what, the timeline on submitting paperwork and whatnot.
Chair, I might note that the relationships and the comfort level that John has built over the last year with OES and FEMA has taken us in a dramatically different direction with them. We don't fight with them like we did before. We didn't have the paper trails before, we do now. But when you look at his list of the number of projects that he's completed or that are completed, as well as the projects that are due to be completed before June 30th, it's a substantial number. It's quite impressive as to what he's got on that board. When you put all that together, I expect that if those projects are completed by the end of this fiscal year, that, there's good likelihood we're going to get that money in the next fiscal year. But here's the other thing is that when we did the spring storms, where did the money come from to pay those before OES and FEMA would even give us back money? Well, we took it out of RIM. And so there's, several $1 million that are sitting there out of RIM right now because that's how we paid for it. The question is, for all those other projects, some of it we got money up front, others we didn't. And for those that we didn't, where did the money come from? And there's the cash flow problem again. So I think we need to be realistic about how aggressive and persistent we're going to be in getting reimbursement for those projects going back. 2017, that's 3 years ago, and Butte Fire, 5 years ago. How soon and how aggressive are we going to be? And as long as they're on the books, I know that we're going to get something done. But I'd like to know how much money we have as an expectation that will come in the next fiscal year, even until December of 2020, that will give us some kind of a better idea of what that cash flow is going to be.
So to your point, I think the delta is the delta between the revenue that we've projected on documents we've already submitted and the difference between that and the revenue that could be outstanding for projects that would complete that we haven't submitted paperwork for. Because the $2 million represents revenue we've already submitted for all intents and purposes. So there may be some level above that. And your question is, do we expect to get the money or not? That's where the big if is. If we submitted the paperwork, I'm comfortable in saying we expect to get it. That isn't to say in the coming fiscal year, that isn't to say there isn't a world where we complete a project, submit the paperwork, and actually get the money next year. But I think it's a little bit more iffy. But at the end of the day, I'm not refuting at all that if we have a project schedule and we show we're going to complete, and we've got clear direction from the board that we're submitting the paperwork as expeditiously as possible, we have at least done our work, and it's fair to say we're going to get revenue, if not in the coming fiscal year, then in the following fiscal year.
And could we not then make adjustments like we do with everything else to more accurately reflect the situation?
Let me, before we go, just sort of go down this path, and then that takes some work. Is the board interested in a what might happen versus we know there's 1.9 million that has been submitted? There's other projects that are yet to be still closed out, and that's really going based on what we think might happen, revenue next year, to put into this budget. If you're interested in going down this, then that's a huge shift in board policy. And so I think we need to talk about that before we ask staff to do that. Not that it's a lot of work. Ben?
I think there's one thing that Supervisors Mills said in there is, there was this proposed budget that was put together. There's a time gap in between when OES had put this together. There's some more, I think he said that there's been some more filings where the paperwork has been turned into OES, so potentially that will come in. That's not necessarily in here. That I believe that's what he's reaching at, not the what ifs for next year.
No.
I think it's like hard things that have been submitted. Is that what you're saying, sir?
Yes.
And I'm hearing you strongly, and I do want to say I appreciate the work Mr. Osborne's done. We put some extra money in there from the PG&E funds to help facilitate this, and he's used it in a great way so that we've moved forward in a strong way with OES and built the process along with CAO, and that is appreciated. There's one other ask, and is, potentially there's some money that would be spent from another fund in 2022 and 2023 that's sitting there that we could possibly borrow from. And I would ask if Mr. Garamendi is willing to think about lending us some of the money from the PG&E settlement for a moment for consideration also. You can tell me now.
Jack?
Madam Chair, we have a pretty simple thing here when you break it down. We've got revenues and we got expenses. And to get out of this room today, they have to balance. I think that we have $974,000 of additions here that we should contemplate. And then we all know that we're throwing best guesses up on the wall. I think we all agree on revenue. And I think we all agree that we're being very conservative. So I think we're going to come in fine. So we can either change the amount of that we're declaring that's going to come in revenue, as you know, Supervisor Mills had one way of doing that, which is taking a look at OES. We could also simply tweak what we think is going to come in on property taxes, as Supervisor Stopper said earlier, or we could just say that we're not going to have a reduction of sales tax. Any of those will do. We're guessing as best we can. The main thing I think is important is that we just hold the spending and see what happens and get out of this room. And we don't talk about anything crazy or very divisive at this moment.
The answer is no, Dan.
Yeah, clearly.
Gary, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts is, I'm glad to hear Jack be conservative. But here's my opinion. The only thing, the whole thing, our budget is projected on projections on what we're going to have, and we're conservative, obviously, on those projections. And to me, the only way we can do this is not do any more projections. It has to be solid income. And the only income, and not even income, it's the pot of money that we have. And in my mind, the only reality of the pot of money that we have that we could use is the 8 positions that are general fund that have been open for the last 2 or 3 years. To freeze those, wipe them off, and take that money that's projected in this budget and push it over to at least the 545 that's already been spent on the previous budget.
I have additionally 15 positions that are not life safety or revenue generating general fund positions that are in the list as well.
But my opinion is those 8 will cover this 545. And at this point, until we get to August, September's budget, that'll cover this budget. And at that time, we can have this further discussion on all of this, and we'll know more, and we'll have hopefully more money to deal with, and maybe those 8 positions we can go back into or what have you. But it's all the same pot of money. And I'm not interested in forecasting. We can go over here and forecast money here, or forecast money there, forecast money here. That's there. That money we have, it's in the budget. If we just say we haven't filled those positions for 2 or 3 years, it adds up to this sum. That's there. We can use that money and reproject it over here to backfill this. And it's there. That's the only money we have to work with in my mind. These other projections, I think, until we get to September or August, it's projections. So,
Krista, could you clarify, if we do salary sweep, what difference does it make if we have those positions on the books or not? They're not filled.
You're highlighting the exact concern. The recommendation here would be to work with Human Resources, identify all the open positions. Let's look first at the ones that, as Supervisor Mills and Toffanelli have identified as having been on the books for years. But the issue is that we just made a 5.3% cut. So 2 of those positions, for example, could be from the same department. in which case, those open positions, so to speak, if salary savings hadn't already been budgeted, which we did have departments budget some salary savings, if they hadn't already been budgeted, would be clearly a place where department heads likely would look to absorb that 5% cut. So it would function as a double hit on some level to the departments who house those open positions. Although it is true, it's all general fund, it's a matter of, what the practical reality would be, at least between now and final for that department, or the affected departments.
Good point, Krista, very good point. You're right. So that money could already be spent in this budget, so.
Al, let's sort of bring this back in. What is it on the list that we're gonna keep, and how are we gonna pay for it?
I'll second what Mr. Toffanelli has put forward, that right now, I think in this time, we should only be considering the money that's already spent, and then bring the other things back for consideration in August. I think the other things, barring that a capital asset investment ends up doing the same thing, which we may have a remedy for already. I think these things can wait safely till August and September for us when we have more hard numbers in front of us. So I'm willing to consider the 545, and that's all for right now.
Gary?
Consider the 545, the rest of it off the table till final.
Dennis?
I can't take the 332 off the table either, so 545 and the 332, I think, are criticals.
Jack?
I think there's only one person in this entire budget that's getting their pay cut, and that's archivist. So I would like to keep that going. Our archives are pretty cool, and we shouldn't single out a single person. So I would like to have that put back in. I support the 545. I feel like I have a commitment to the sheriff over the last several years, and these 4 cars are on there for the 332, so unless he wants to release me from that obligation, stick with it.
Okay, does
Where
anybody?
are you, Chair?
Pardon?
Where are you?
I'm on the 545 and the 1974. I do have a question for the sheriff, though, on the 332.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you order those vehicles now, when do you have to put your deposit down on them?
Krista, that'd be a good question for her, or Oscar.
I'll defer to either Deputy CEO Rich or Mr. Plumman.
Oscar's got the information.
There's no deposit to speak of. We pay it when we receive the vehicle.
Which will be the end of in 20.
You're not going to see those vehicles till probably
After
March or even April of next year because of the COVID. Everything is delayed right now.
So I don't know where Kathy's at right now, but I bet she's jumping up and down on her
sure she
office
is.
Because what we cannot do
I'm here.
is we can't authorize.
I've just been holding off on comment. I would like to say that you do need to find a funding source for the $545,000. The reason being is that upfitting may suddenly happen prior to September, and we need a way to pay for that. So my 2 cents is find $545,000, and all of those other asks are all worthy. However, I don't think anything's going to blow up if we hold off on them until final. So my suggestion would be on all of them, hold off until September.
Kathy, this is Sheriff. We weren't so much talking about the 545. I think they've got that part figured out. It was the 332 for the vehicles that would be for next year's budget. The question would be, if we ordered them now, we don't typically have, we don't have to pay for them until we receive them. We would not be
Correct.
receiving those vehicles until probably at least March possibly April of next year because everything's been pushed back. The question is there going to be an issue with them approving that so that we can get them ordered knowing that that bill will not come due until probably March or April?
You cannot spend
You
money.
still have to have a funding source. I guess maybe I don't understand your question. Kathy?
Okay, well, that answers.
You do need a funding source, however, because an invoice wouldn't be paid, and therefore technically an appropriation, an expense wouldn't be leaving the county until you have the vehicle and it's fully upfitted. I really don't see an issue why you can't delay until final. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sheriff DiVasilio, don't you guys try and hold off for the new models to come out anyway?
I'm sorry, repeat that again, Kathy? I haven't.
Don't you hold off a little in the year for the new models to come out before you order the vehicles?
They're already on.
And
those
wouldn't
now.
that be after September? I'm not sure what your process is.
No, they're already on them now. That's why we're wanting to get them ordered. And I'll throw a bone out to the board. When it comes to 443 money, if I use that as a funding source for next year's vehicles, knowing that we're not going to see that bill until March or April, what kind of guarantee am I going to get that I'm going to get my money back?
Yeah, sure, yeah, we'll do it, yeah.
Well,
Here's some collateral.
at that point, we could do a budget adjustment, come final and have it more secured. But at this point, to make the commitment to you now so that we have an appropriation so you can go forward, that's the key point in this discussion at this moment. Where the money comes from right now is to lock something up as an appropriation. And when we get to final, that can be moved over and reset.
Okay,
Just as long as all 5 of them raise their right hand and swear to reimburse us.
there you go.
What do you want there?
It's going
Oh,
on.
the right hand?
That's your left hand, Marita.
I
The
know.
right hand. Okay, I will put that out there then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Take care of it.
All right, so now.
Good job, Rick.
Now we're back to the
Thanks, Oscar.
545 and in good faith, the 1900.
I'm definitely willing to, they have a good point on the 1900. I'm willing to put that in with the 545. It's a single person department.
Just to function fairness.
I guess I'd like to do it because I've never heard Rebecca whine before.
I'll go along with the 19 just because Jack paid the $250 yesterday.
Oh,
Gary's going to make up the 19, I'm way ahead.
a good return on investment, Jack. All right, so,
Is that what it takes, is to whine?
yeah, we used to have a chief probation officer who gave the best wine I've ever heard, and we had an award for him for the best wine, he got money for his budget.
Mike?
And we had that for Jim Moffett. We had a statue we would give every year to the best department that pulled at our heartstrings or our pocketbook. Maybe we should start it again.
Well, now we're just fortunate to have the best chief probation officer.
Obviously, Rick would win every year here lately.
Oh, no, that goes with the job, for sheriff, it's wine 101. I mean, all sheriffs, not just ours. Okay, so now we need to decide where we're going to pull the money.
How are we going to pay for it?
Right.
And how are we going to pay for $547,000?
Yeah.
Plus
approximately.
1,974.
That's 547, actually $26 off, but we're
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Ben.
I right now, I mean, the only clear path I see is, and this hurts, is contingencies at the moment. And this gives us a total of $879 minus $879,000 that we will have to backfill, because that will include the AB 443. So don't think we've just swept that money away. Minus $26 that we're gonna have to backfill later on. My suggestion is to go with contingencies, although I still agree with Supervisor Mills' point that I am cautiously optimistic that things are going to be different in August and September, providing that the next fire doesn't start.
Gary?
I have a question. Certificate of participation. Are we limited to what we can spend that money on?
Capital improvement projects.
Capital improvement projects only.
No assets.
Okay.
Dennis?
I don't want to drag us down that far. These contingencies are cash flow. And I guess I'd like to hear from the controller as to what she thinks might be a best solution here. If she's on the line.
Okay. Jack?
I'm good with contingencies.
Okay.
Well,
Kathy, do you want to comment about our pulling from contingencies for this 547,000?
I'm really glad that you supervisors get to make the decision. My thought on that is we're coming into fire season, so I would be a little concerned.
So where are you recommending?
I would recommend the 545 be put into or pulled from AB 443 on a temporary basis. And I would recommend that the remaining items wait until final. For the archives, I know that by final you will find the $1,900. And for the others, I just don't know. We don't know what's going to happen.
Okay, the sheriff is going to utilize 443 for the 4 vehicles he'd like to order now. So the 443 in good faith has been tapped.
no.
So for
Well, it currently has a $1.2 million fund balance, and they will get revenues next year. And I'm not trying to throw the sheriff under the bus. This is a stopgap measure. So the 545 has to happen no matter what, because we've got vehicles with no upfitting, and that could occur at any point in time with the reopening of the economy. The additional vehicles, I understand the fleet maintenance portion of it. I don't see that putting this up for a few months would prevent him from getting vehicles in the coming fiscal year.
Okay.
So if I may, so the board's already spoken on what they're willing to fund. So my advice would be we don't necessarily need to rehash it from this point.
No.
But it's 6 of one of half a dozen of the other. If you say that we're going to ask Rick to buy 8 cars out of AB 443 right now, we're making a promise at final that we're going to backfill that. And either we're going to backfill it and meet that commitment because it is being streamed on YouTube, and Under Sheriff Macedo will get that clip, I'm sure. So either we're going to backfill it and meet the commitment we just made, which might end up coming out of contingencies or other revenues or reserves, or we take it out of contingency and reserves and don't touch the AB 443. Now, I'm not advocating for the sheriff. What I'm trying to illustrate is we're making promises to pay him back, and one way or another, if we made the promise to pay him back, we need to follow through with that. And in that case, my recommendation would be, and I don't like the option, I'm not suggesting it's the only option, but in essence, we're still talking about taking it from the contingencies or reserves until final. And so if that's what we're talking about, if I've illustrated the transaction that we're talking about properly, I'd say why build in all the rework on that and do all of the transactions associated with that when we made a commitment that we're going to take the money from somewhere and backfill it to the sheriff in AB 443. Now, the other thing is we're saying if we don't get it, we're not backfilling AB 443, in which case I think they might have had a different statement if we're saying, hey, if we get it, we'll do it. But what I thought I heard and what I'd be tracking in my notes is when we do get it, or when we get to final, we're going to backfill AB 443.
So my question would be to the auditor, as well as probably to Krista. There's a lot of restricted and committed reserves. Is there any other unrestricted reserve account that might be able to be utilized in a short term?
You've got your section 115 fund with the 1.5 million. That would be the 27th payroll.
Borrowed from the 27th payroll?
Look, we can talk about which pot we're pulling out of. It doesn't matter. Later on, we have to pay it back. You know, it's, you know,
So we-
it could, you know, we could put the name contingencies or the name AB 443 on it. Either way, we're telling everyone we're going to pay it back. So we're in the same
Yeah.
$879,000 hole to pay back later. I mean, you know, it's smoke and mirrors. We can talk about this or that. Either way, we're paying it back. So I will stick with contingencies right now for the 545. And we can work through everything else, but that, it is what it is. You know, if we go through into, we're paying Mr. DeBasilio back for $332,000 of AB 443 money that we just discussed.
So to,
Right.
I think,
But it's all the same, it's the same thing.
So we make the
Okay.
commitment now.
to Supervisor Mills' point, though, my point is not specific to the 115 money. Now, I'm not suggesting we take this money. It's one of the options, but it's not something that we have to pay back in the current year. The board could take any source of one-time money, which, you know, any account is one-time money, and allocate that to the budget and not have to pay it back. You could certainly set a priority if we pulled whatever the amount of money is from that. Now, we have it built in now in the current year's budget to make a $1.5 million contribution to the park.
Yeah.
That would have to be adjusted, and then you'd have money available on a one-time basis to be able to buy one-time things. I wouldn't advocate allocating it to ongoing expenditures, but in this case, it's a one-time fund to a one-time expenditure. Wouldn't have to pay it back in the same way I heard the commitment to pay back the AB 443. But then we're just using, you know, a different form of a savings account to draw down on one-time money.
That's a good point.
Gary, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I don't want to tap into the PARs.
Okay.
That'll cost us way more down the line.
We have a motion by Ben to use contingencies for the 547. Is there a second? Second. Any further discussion? I'm gonna,
This is
I need
for
to
the-
open it up to any public comment on this.
This is for, just to clear, this is for the 547, for the 545 that's already spent, and the 19, okay,
Right,
for the, okay,
Correct.
at archives.
correct. So,
And what's the final tally of contingencies drawing that much down?
Krista, what would be the amount in contingencies if we take 547?
One moment, and I will tell you.
Okay.
Sorry.
I just notified the public that you can call in for any comments.
$762,160.
Just for clarification, are we leaving on the net revenue, or the revenue neutral camera project?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
Frankly, that's really not open for
That's- discussion in the yeah.
budget now because they've taken care
okay, fine. I'm just clarifying as I'm finalizing this budget transfer, which once we have clear board direction, I will print and bring a hard copy into all of the board members and the CAO in the boardroom. So were we to, That's interesting. Yeah, $546,974 would be the requested draw. So starting with the 1.5 million, it would be currently budgeted in contingencies. And after the HVAC draw for $192,840, that would bring the contingencies to 1.3 million approximately, at which point technically $1,307,160. So after the requested draw for both of those items, our contingencies would be at $760,000, or $760,186.
So I think something got lost in the numbers there. The numbers are 1.307 million minus 547.
Right. So $760,186
Okay, I got you.
is what would be left.
Okay.
You know, considering the governor was going to be doing the exact same thing, he said all funds are open for pulling down to help pay for COVID-19. So I'm going to wait see if we have any public comment to call in.
Madam Chair, is this the motion to close up the preliminary budget, or just on this one item?
On this item, and then I'm going to ask.
Madam Clerk, at this point, we don't have any call-in public comments.
Okay, thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to take it from contingency draw. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Passes on a 4-1 vote of the board with Supervisor Mills as the nay. Okay. Now we need to close the public hearing.
Madam Chair, if you would allow me before that happens to print and bring in the final budget transfers for the board.
Got it. Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
You want 10?
I'd take 2. Get us out of here at lunch.
Rick, what happened to your,
Oh, I couldn't take it.
Gentlemen, ready? Okay, I want to close the public hearing, and we will be bringing back the recommended preliminary budget at our June 23rd meeting. I'd like to move to staff comments. Are there any staff comments? I understand our librarian has a comment.
Yes, please.
Yes, please,
Oh,
Nancy.
can you hear me? Oh, great. I just wanted to bring you some news about our Lunch at the Library program. I found out last night that Amador Unified approved our MOU, asking us for them to provide our lunches for Lunch at the Library this summer. So we're very, very happy about that. I would like to thank again Bonnie Rich and Julie Moss-Lewis for their hard work on the MOU, and also the State Library, which is helping us with the transportation costs and other costs that we'll have, in addition to allowing us to do the grab-and-go lunches, and also to prepare grab-and-go materials. So we're really excited about this, that we're going to have packets, takeaway packets for 6 weeks for our kids, at 4 levels, 0 to 5, grades K through 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6. And every packet will have, well, the first packet will have all their supplies and a great book for them and lots of really fun activities. One of my favorites is for the older kids, the science of superpowers, where they'll learn about why, Superman can fly and all of that. And then we're going to give them a blank comic book for them to design their own storyline, and we even have some help for them for how to draw superhero figures, so that should be fun for them. And then we're also able to put into that one a comic book produced by a chap in Amador County called Captain Encouragement. He does programming for schools on anti-bullying, so we thought that's a good place to put that little extra gift for our kids. So the state library is helping with this funding. Also, the Friends of the Library are helping me do this. So we're really excited that we'll be able to give food and perhaps, hopefully, bridge that learning gap that sometimes takes place in the summer with our children. So thank you for your support of this, and I just wanted to bring you that good news today.
Nancy, thank you. And after going through budget hearings, we definitely could use good news.
You need some good news.
We appreciate all that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy to see you. Thanks for your great work.
Wait a minute. Can I get any of those packets for the Ebbets Pass corridor?
What age would you like?
Well, at least kindergarten up.
Okay, yeah, you sure can. Just write us. The registration form is online on our website, calaveraslibrary.com.
Thanks, Nancy.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Are there any other staff comments? Okay, are there any board comments? Anything the board would like to report on, discuss?
This has
Mr.
been
Mills.
singularly the most robust and difficult one that I know three of us have gone through together. But I'll be pleased to support what we've done.
Madam Chair.
Done?
Ms. Hall.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, staff.